Here we go. Welcome to a special episode of Whitetail Rendezvous on Facebook Live, and I'm joined by Benjamin Penna, Eric Thorson, and Meadow Caulfield. And they're representing the governor today for the governor's 16th annual deer hunting kickoff. Welcome to the show. Welcome to Facebook Live. And Eric, why don't we start off with you and why the governor has done this for 16 years. It's a tradition in Minnesota. And so why is this happening?
Yeah, the Minnesota deer hunting firearms opener is a huge tradition in the state of Minnesota. We have nearly 500,000 deer hunters in the state. Have a long tradition of hunting whitetail deer, and it's a great tradition. And I just want to kind of highlight that in communities throughout the state, and we have been doing that annually since for about the last 16 years.
How many out-of-state hunters come into to Minnesota for the gun season?
That's a good question. We, certainly mostly residents here in the state of Minnesota. It's not a large non-resident destination like other states, but according to sales last year, we probably had about 15,000 non-residents hunt in Minnesota. A lot of those are friends and family in neighboring states, but certainly have pretty friendly environment for non-resident hunters with lower license costs and pretty liberal regulations and bag limits. So and a lot of public land access as well. So it's a pretty good state for non-residents to visit. It doesn't have the notoriety as some other whitetail states for non-residents, but certainly a great hunting destination for other residents of other states.
I look forward to getting there. My son's in high school 5A football here in Colorado, and so he'll probably make the playoffs. So all my deer hunting this year is being held because I won't miss one game of the senior year. But I hope to be a non-resident hunting the Bluff County around La Crescent and along the Mississippi River this year. Ben, let's talk about your experience in Minnesota. I know you're a huge mentor, and let's talk about, why Minnesota's such a great place to deer hunt.
Minnesota's great because it has the multiple areas. We have mixed farmland up into the heavy timber. Can hunt all the way up into the BWCA. So it gives us a lot of opportunity to hunt different areas. The southeast, like the Blufflands area, is wonderful. We have a really healthy deer population. And per capita, I think we have quite a large amount of public land for our population base. So lots of opportunity.
So if I heard you right, it doesn't get real crowded. You get a lot of land. Go ahead.
It can always get crowded, just like any type of hunting. But if you're willing to put the effort in, or as a group you have a designated spot, you can get away from people. It's not hard.
Menno, your thoughts on hunting Minnesota?
Well, I'm up in the northern half of the state, and one of the wonderful things about Minnesota here in the northern end of the state is that, like Ben said, we have a ton of public land. Our deer densities aren't as high up here, but we certainly have a lot of space for hunters to get out and find their own patch of the woods and sit in it. And so it makes for a really good opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity for folks that are interested in deer hunting. You don't necessarily have to own land in this state in order to be able to be successful or have access to public land. So that's one of the wonderful things about Minnesota deer hunting.
Eric, talking about public land, percentage of availability of public land for hunting in Minnesota, do you have those numbers?
I don't have those handy. It really varies by region. In the southwestern part of the state, it's primarily farmland and private land. So, probably the best hunting opportunities down there are wildlife management areas, state wildlife management areas, and waterfowl production areas that the Fish and Wildlife Service manages. So there are opportunities down there, but, it's probably 95% private land or more. In the central transition zone down to the southeast, there is some more public land, but primarily private land there, but you can get access on those parcels if you ask permission. And then in northeastern Minnesota, we have, as Meadow said, the vast majority of that land is public, either county managed land, state managed land, or national forest land. So, some counties are, upwards of 90% public land in far northeastern Minnesota. So it really varies kind of from southwest to northeast in the state.
I
Yeah,
could be
once you
wrong. Oops,
go
sorry,
ahead,
Bruce.
Ben.
I just helped with a class last night, and I think one of the quotes was right around 5 million acres are public land in Minnesota.
That's sizable. I mean, it's the state of what, 10,000 lakes?
14,000.
14,000?
Yeah, we're modest here in Minnesota.
You're modest here in Minnesota. I was just going to say, once you get away from the Twin Cities, that's your core metropolitan area. Everything other than that is basically suburban rural, in my opinion.
Majority
Is that
rural.
correct?
Yeah.
Is that a correct statement?
Yes.
Yeah, we have a few mid-sized cities, but otherwise it's a lot of rural and farming communities and large tracts of forest land.
So, getting back to you, Eric, does Minnesota have an atlas that people can get online and say, "Hey, I want to hunt near Hinckley, and where are the wildlife management areas or state-controlled access lands?"
Yeah, we have a good interactive map on our DNR web page, which is mndnr.gov, and go to recreational compass, and that shows a lot of the state managed areas and some other publicly accessible areas, so you can kind of zoom in. It's a great resource for hunters and other folks that want to recreate in the state. And there is private atlases that are available, and plat books on a county basis are always good for ownership, and there's other maps that are available, but that for state lands, that recreational compass on our webpage is a great resource for folks.
Have you guys ever been to the Deer Opener Classic that's been held? Is that something that you've attended?
No,
I have. It was held in Grand Rapids. Sorry, Ben.
Yes, I attended the one in Grand Rapids last year as well.
And what if somebody shows up for that? What can they expect?
There's a lot of events, kind of outdoors, for all types of individuals. There's presentations and seminars. There's a large banquet that Thursday night, and there's a bunch of media there. A lot of excitement around the deer opener. People with print and radio media doing interviews and discussing kind of prospects for the upcoming firearms deer season.
There's some information too for new hunters, like butchering or cutting meat. There was a meat cutting demonstration there last year. Also the Wall of Shame, conservation officers on hand for asking questions, also DNR staff. There's a lot of information, and if you're new to it, or any of us can always learn. That's definitely fun to attend if you can.
Eric, when you think about success in the state of Minnesota, what regions have the best or highest success, hunters to harvest?
Yeah, probably our best deer producing areas and the areas where we have the highest hunter density are kind of southeastern Minnesota, the Bufflands country, and then also kind of a very large area in central Minnesota, which includes kind of the mixed farmland transition area and including kind of the southern forested areas of the state. So those are the areas that have the highest success. Last year during our firearms gun seasons, we had about 35% success, folks that harvested at least one deer. And so pretty high success rates, and we have an increasing deer herd here in Minnesota that's pretty healthy. In most areas of the state, we're still recovering in some areas from hard back-to-back winters in 2013 and 14 in the far northern Arrowhead region. But for the most part, we have a pretty robust deer herd here in Minnesota.
Let's talk about disease and predation. Eric, I'll just throw that out to you, and Ben and Meadow can chime in. Let's talk about CWD, EHD. Is that a concern in the state?
We have had no documented cases of EHD in Minnesota. We've had it in fairly close in neighboring states, but we have not had any outbreaks here in Minnesota, something that we certainly watch for, and we have a wildlife health program that monitors diseases such as that. Chronic wasting disease is another matter. Probably our biggest concern right now as far as the health of the long-term health of the white-tailed deer population here in Minnesota. We currently have 3 captive game farm facilities that have positive CWD that we're doing surveillance sampling around in 3 areas of the state. And then we do have some wild deer in southeastern Minnesota that have tested positive for chronic wasting disease, and so we're trying to control that and kind of stamp that outbreak out in southeastern Minnesota right now. So really a concern, and we have kind of expanding CWD issues with the neighboring states in southeastern Iowa and then western Wisconsin too. So we're concerned about kind of overflow from those areas, and so southeastern Minnesota is really our focus, where our concern is related to CWD right now.
Meadow?
Certainly, Eric is obviously in the position where he specializes in giving that sort of data, but CWD is obviously a big concern for me as well, especially as it shows up in different locations, and the ability for it to transport unintentionally through hunter harvest, and also just through these game or cervid farms.
So we also have implemented, which I think is great, a import ban, so we can't bring in full harvested animals. So it has to be a clean skull plate, no spinal column, or any attachments from any state into Minnesota, which will really help in the long run.
And the one thing I would say is that, being a resident of Minnesota, I'm pretty proud of our Department of Natural Resources for the good work that they do for CWD surveillance. And like Ben mentioned, they're pretty strict and are cracking down on the import. And even though it seems like it might be an inconvenience, those small things that may take a little extra time when you're out-of-state hunting or even hunting in-state, it makes a big difference. And so I would say that hunters in compliance with those laws, and then also for sampling, makes a big difference when helping the Department of Natural Resources.
I'll just mention too
that
a number of other states have the carcass import restrictions now as well. So it's always a good idea for hunters that are traveling to make sure to check regulations and probably take care of your animal and get it processed and do taxidermy work in the state that you harvest that animal to reduce the risk of spreading the disease elsewhere in the country.
Yeah, I was going to throw my 2 cents in because I do travel, and I always leave the animal in the state that I harvested at. If I'm gonna mount it or process it, it's always I leave it there because I'll get back there, within a normal amount of time. And folks, that's just smart because we're all part of the solution. And I just think it's incumbent to all of us to say, okay, what can I do? And there's plenty of ways you can do this to restrict CWD from being, spread. That's for sure, because unfortunately in 1967, the first case of CWD was found up in Fort Collins, Colorado, in a test herd. They were doing some research, and so it's been a long time, and it has spread, and so we need to do our part as hunters, period. Predation. What's the status of your wolf predation, coyotes, and black bear predation?
Yeah, you kind of mentioned the 3 major predators: white-tailed deer in Minnesota, coyotes and bears most likely, just on fawns primarily. Of course, wolves, we did have state management of a wolf population there for a couple years, and it's returned to federal protection and kind of awaiting decisions in that regard. But our wolf population has been pretty stable in the state for a while, a slight expansion of the range, but it's been a long-term presence here in northern Minnesota, a pretty robust wolf population, so something that we manage with for a number of years. Black bears are trying to increase the population a bit, and we have a pretty healthy black bear population, and they do take some newborn fawns in the spring. And then coyotes are an unprotected mammal in Minnesota, pretty common statewide, except where there's wolves. They're pretty hard on coyotes, but you can hunting and trapping season is year long and no limit there. But as you know, coyotes are pretty smart, and they can evade trappers and hunters pretty easily. So we have a pretty healthy coyote population where there aren't an abundance of wolves. So those are kind of a rundown on the 3 major predators, white-tailed deer here in the state. But despite that predation pressure, we still have, hunter harvest and winter severity are really the 2 main mortality factors of our deer herd in Minnesota. So those are the things that we pay closest attention to.
Ben, your thoughts?
I have to agree with Eric. The predation is, I would say, right on par with everyone else that has the same predators that we have. You know, the DNR manages the deer populations very well, as best as they can, given what we have and what we can do in this state. So,
Meadow?
Well, like Eric mentioned, Minnesota's one of the few states that we've always had wolves. They never were extirpated completely from our state, and we've always dealt with them, and they've always been there, and there's been an expansion over, the last couple of decades. But reality, predation is one of those things that's really difficult to manage for, and it's just on the landscape, and it's not something that we're really concerned about here when it comes to the deer population, at least. And so, I agree with Eric.
And folks, it is a management issue for a lot of states, and I think Minnesota has done a great job because wolves never left Minnesota. They were never gone, and they've been part of it. And one thing, if you get up in the bounding waters and canoe up in there and hear a wolf howl at night, you're in the wilderness, and that's that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. It really isn't. And it's just like running into a grizzly bear in the Rockies. It's interesting, but it's part of being out in the wilderness. And this guy, I like that, but we got to manage it that's what we have to do. And the DNR, I think, are doing everything they can to the best of their abilities throughout the United States to manage those predators. And with that, we're going to end this segment of Facebook Live with folks from Minnesota and talking about the 16th annual Governor's Deer Hunting Kickoff.